Well, Mimi, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm really excited to talk to you. You're a very busy person, involved in so many things, and you've been involved in a lot of different things ever since you were young. You know, you moved from Boston to Orlando. Your father opened the very first Kung Fu temple in the United States. You got your start in that, very accomplished. And then this is so cool. You were actually the model for the Disney character Mulan.
Yes.
What was that like to be asked to do that?
Yeah, that was quite an honor. And honestly, I really attribute it to right place, right time, and right occupation. So the fact that I did martial arts and Kung Fu at such a young age and had the opportunity to be working with Disney just gave me the right exposure. But being a part of something like that at the time, I really can say that I had no idea the long lasting effects many, many years later, kind of being related to and affiliated with a Disney princess would have. Like, I don't think at the time I really understood, especially being, I was still a teenager. So I thought it was cool and it was fun, and working with the animation team was amazing. But, now at this stage of my life, it's definitely been amazing to see what an impact the character has had on so many people, not just for women, but, especially Asian American women, and just seeing how these little girls have looked up to this character and what an important role she's played. So it was just really, really special to be a part of that.
I mean, that's pretty much the first time that I can think of for Disney that, Asian Americans, Pacific Islanders saw someone who might have looked like them. And to be the main character, to be a strong woman, I mean, that was incredibly exciting. You are a huge advocate for the Asian American Pacific Islander community, not just here in Central Florida, but Florida. And really, I mean, that has trickled immensely. And I know that you do a lot of work raising awareness about AAPI, the community, the rights, and also, you help push the AAPI bill, the legislation. You created the petition. And I'm going to get to that in a moment, but I wanted to take you back to when you were growing up, because when we had spoken before, you had mentioned that when you were younger, you didn't necessarily fully embrace your heritage and your culture. So, why was that?
Yeah, I used to be really embarrassed about that fact, but really honestly, I started to learn as an adult, wow, that wasn't on me. That was on society and on not having the positive role models. Maybe Mulan could have come out earlier, or, not having representation. And so growing up in Central Florida, particular Orlando, Florida in 1980, was not very diverse. And I for sure felt like I did not belong. I definitely felt like, the need to want to, fit in, and even the desire to want to look like everyone else, because I really didn't embrace the fact that I was so different, let alone the fact that my parents built a Chinese temple in the middle of Orlando, Florida. It was very kind of, very in your face a little bit with culture. And now, of course, it's something I'm so proud of. But at the time, I don't want to say I was embarrassed about it, but I definitely, it wasn't my first talking point as a child where I was like, hey, we're the Kung Fu school down the road. And, just growing up and going to school, I definitely was made to feel different by my peers as well. I don't think it was just an internalized thing. It was comments that I would get and looks and people making fun of my name and just, the typical, I've had the opportunity to speak to so many Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders in this past month and these past years on their experiences. And we all echo the same thing, that feeling of not belonging, people asking you where you're from, making fun of your lunch. I'm not alone in this, but it definitely was something that I didn't embrace my culture when I was younger. I mean, I always enjoyed doing Kung Fu to a certain extent, but I didn't really embrace the fact that, I'm Asian American and I'm very proud. I wasn't wearing my AAPI pride button, back then.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's when you're so young, you don't even realize that, you might look different, but that's when you're growing up. And I've talked to a lot of, not just Asian Americans, but a lot of minorities who, you get the other imposed on you as a child. And that's really hard to be made to feel like you're different. How did you go from that? How did you get comfortable in your own skin? How did you do that?
Yeah. And just to kind of touch on that before I answer the question is it's not even the feeling of different, because different is okay. We actually all now celebrate our differences, right? We do.
Yeah.
Right. Different isn't okay, but I think it was more of a negative tone of like being different is bad. Right. So I definitively am different from, people around me and everyone, even now in Central Florida, we all have our differences in culture. And that's something that we now embrace. But I think it was more of that different is a negative thing, right? Yes. And I think now we want to celebrate those differences. But to answer your question, I think actually training in Kung Fu is what helped my confidence and what helped make who I am today. The principles of hard work is very entrenched, and respect, but also, especially at the Wallam Temple, one of the things that we're really big on is learning kindness and fellowship and learning what it is to be part of a community, right? And so just like being raised in that environment really helped me come into my own, knowing that maybe at school I didn't feel a certain way, but certainly at the Kung Fu school, we had a sense of community and belonging, and doing Kung Fu itself is very confidence building, right? It does make you feel empowered in a way, not just physically, but mentally, because you're challenging yourself all the time and you're overcoming those challenges, whether it's physical, whether it's mental. It is very, very hard martial art. And so that for sure is something that has helped me. I definitely attribute my parents to be very strong role models. My mother is a very strong, independent woman. And so seeing them as my direct role models, looking back, I can say definitely played an impact into that, when they weren't in media and pop culture necessarily. So luckily I did have strong role models to look up to directly.
We're in such an interesting time. And growing up now, I mean, obviously I'm an adult, but what would you say to children or youth who, specifically in minority or marginalized groups, and they too have felt the negative connotation placed upon them of, being different is bad, conformity is what you want. What advice would you want to give, or the advice that you would have wanted to give your younger self? I mean, I know that you had Kung Fu, which is amazing, but anything that you would have told yourself?
I mean, looking back, there's so many things I would be telling my younger self, like had I known then what I know now. But I really feel like being a child, that's part of the growth process, right? Is like coming into your own through your own experiences. So I'm not even sure that I would be able to mitigate that for someone, because, they're going to look at an adult and say, you don't know what you're talking about. You don't know my struggles, right? But really, I feel like leading kids to a community that they can feel where they belong is important. So that could be the chess club, or it could be ballet, or it could be Kung Fu. But I really feel that it's important that kids have that environment and have those friends that they can feel that comfort level with. I mean, but I would, of course, encourage kids to know that, we are special because we're different and we work hard, and the things we do make us special, and that being different is not a negative, right? I think it's just kind of educating us. And of course, that leads to the reason I feel so strongly about AAPI history being included in our curriculum, because I feel that the kids now are finally seeing Asian superheroes, are finally seeing some semblance of pop culture being reflected, where, in the 80s, a lot of times the Asian characters were, the butt end of the joke, and were the stupid character or the funny one that just,
like an accent, right?
Yes. And it was always, the representation was very, very poor, very, very stereotypical. And so I feel like there are some breakthroughs now. So hopefully this next generation won't feel that. But I think even further than that, we need to let our kids know that if you are, for say, from any background, like you said, any marginalized group, it doesn't have to be Asian American. That is America. And so that goes back to history and learning about the contributions that so many Americans have had. And that doesn't mean that they only look one way, right? There's so many contributions across the board from all different heritage backgrounds. And I think learning about those and pointing them out and saying, hey, at this time, way back in the day, this person, made such a civic contribution. I think having that connectivity would be very helpful. So I feel like education is really the key.
Do you feel like having gone through kind of feeling alienated by your peers growing up made you stronger, or would you have wished you'd never gone through that?
That's always a tough question, right? Yeah. I do feel though that who I am today is based on the experiences I've had, and I don't think I would change those things. I do look back as a child and think, okay, I could have made smarter choices at some point in time when you kind of go through your history. But I definitely feel it did make me personally stronger. But again, I was fortunate to have a community that I could be a part of that then was able to say, hey, if someone said this to you, that was wrong. Here's a response you could use, and also that doesn't make you, any less of a human. But other people may have had that experience and not had someone giving them positive reinforcement. So, for me personally, I definitely think it helped make me stronger because it gives me also a sense of empathy to know what others are going through now and how I can be of more help.
Right. No, I mean, it's huge. A lot of times one has to go through those difficult times to then be able to truly know how to pay it forward and connect on that level. You're obviously a huge advocate for the AAPI community, but also another, passion of yours is advocating for mental health awareness. Where does that stem from?
Yeah, I really feel as a fully grown adult, quote unquote, that had I known then what I know now, I would definitely have not been so embarrassed to try to seek out my own mental health, right? And just the benefit that I've received from therapy and mental health awareness and understanding that you should be no less embarrassed to go see someone for mental health as you would be for going to Kung Fu or a sport or going to the gym. Like I always say, it's like fitness for your brain, right? And so we should take mindfulness and protective care of ourselves in the same way, and also kind of eliminate that taboo and that stigma, especially as Asian Americans. It's truly, truly there. We don't like to talk about our problems, especially with others. They have no business knowing. And I really, really want to combat that. In addition, of course, it's in my advocacy to be outspoken for survivors of childhood sexual abuse. And that's something in particular that, an experience that I had as a survivor. And so it is something that I also decided as a fully grown adult that I wanted to talk about, to also advocate for. So these are the type of things that as an adult, I realized, my experience can help others, right? By being honest and open with what I've been through, or the fact that I seek mental health aware, will help others feel a little less afraid, right? Or embarrassed about it. Because if this Kung Fu master person can need and ask for help, then maybe so can I. It won't make you feel weak. It won't make you feel helpless, right? I feel like these are things that are important to be said out loud and for others to hear. And that's personal, of course, right? Not everybody is pushed to share. Everyone has to do so on their own terms and time. But for me personally, I realized that I am in a position where if I can help one person, and then sharing those stories would be worthwhile.
When you unburdened yourself, because again, it's a very personal decision whether to, publicly share or even privately share, a trauma such as that. Did you feel like the burden was lifted? Do you feel like that helped you heal in a way?
Yeah, I would say it is helpful, but what people I think tend to not maybe understand as listeners of people's experiences, right? It is different for everyone. I in no means speak on behalf of all survivors or anything. This is all personal to me, but because I am, I'm a public speaker and a public figure, and I'm used to talking out in public, and just because I'm not broken down and crying right now and completely crushed does not mean that it's like reopening a wound every time I decide to address it. And I feel like when speaking to others, like they've had similar experiences, which is why it is so hard. So in one sense, yes, it is liberating to have not be continuously hiding a part of yourself to people you love and people you know. Taking it public is a whole nother level, but I do feel like being able to share that part of yourself with someone, even if it's one person, is very important because you get a level of support and a level of feeling that you're not alone, right? And that's, I think, kind of deep-seated, where as a survivor, you do want to feel that you're not alone, but in no way is it easy. Every time I discuss it, it is definitively hard. I am mindful to myself. My therapist would be so happy. I take care of myself after interviews like this, where I've had to talk about it, because it does reopen a wound every time. And it is not easy. It doesn't necessarily get easier, but right. for sure, there's a sense of, I don't know if relief is the right word, but there is a sense of knowing that you're not alone and that you are hopefully helping others.
I know that when you had decided to come forward to share your trauma, it divided your family a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
What was what was that reaction?
Yeah, I mean, without getting too personal, I think it's like anyone else who shares their truth that you've been seeing in media with the Me Too movement, with any survivor that decides to come forward with their truth, especially if there's a public figure involved, you're not believed. And it's really, really hurtful. It's probably more hurtful than the part where you're like, muster up the courage to share. And then the worst thing that could possibly happen is that people don't believe you. And so naturally, when something like this involves family, it gets very tricky. The family dynamic in the Asian American household is usually very, very tight knit. And again, don't really believe that you should be sharing, that you should be, quote unquote, airing your dirty laundry or letting others know. Like, these are the things that always get swept under the rug. And that, I think, has to change. One, so it doesn't continue to happen to other children, other victims. And two, because it can be really healing for the survivor. So I feel like that viewpoint needs to change, as well as the advocacy for seeking mental health needs to change.
For people who might be in a situation like that with, a trauma of their own, how would you recommend them addressing it? I mean, it's such a personal situation for everyone, but is there something that you would want to share to people who might be going through something similar, in that, the truth may not be received in the way that they wished it would be?
So I tend to be very careful about giving advice to others, but I will say to anyone out there who is a survivor of any trauma or suffering, that it was not your fault and that you are believed. And hopefully there is someone that you can go to, whether it's a therapist or whether it's a loved one, but know that it was not your fault and that you are believed, because ultimately that is what we want to feel as survivors, to have that empathy. And so I can offer that, but I can't really say, oh, definitely go to this person, or, I don't try to give advice that maybe I'm not qualified to give.
Right. No, and that makes sense. And I feel like for every conversation, there are two people. There's the person who shares, the person who receives, hopefully. As listeners, as receivers, what can people do? What could I do because I feel like, unfortunately, when we talk about very sensitive issues, it makes people feel uncomfortable. People don't like to feel uncomfortable, and so people oftentimes shut it down. What can receivers do to help?
Thank you for the question. I feel that something I often talk about on my podcast with people are very uncomfortable conversations. And I really feel if it's uncomfortable for us, that means we should be having them. Mm-hmm. So if something is causing you discomfort, just know that eventually that discomfort will end. And sometimes silence is okay. You don't have to fill it with a lot of talk, if you have nothing useful to say, always just know that being a good listener is that. It means listening and not speaking necessarily, right? But in just general, letting your loved one know that, I'm here for what you need. I'm here to listen, and just letting them know that they are believed and that it was not their fault is good reinforcement, I would say. But if someone is trusting you with their truth, then you just need to kind of absorb and honor that, and know whether a hug is the right moment, know whether passing a Kleenex is the right move to do, or just sitting and listening. I think silence is more powerful than people realize. It doesn't mean that you have to have a response, but just letting them know you love them and that you are there. I think, and that you're not judging them, of course, is
right.
important. Knowing that they're not being judged, just showing compassion is really an important thing. And I think us as listeners can all be better about being uncomfortable for a moment, and then just being able to share compassion and be, caring of those that we're listening to.
And I think that's so important, because it's one thing to hear, right? You could hear, but not really receive it and listen. And I feel like now more than ever, we have to listen, we have to receive. And like you said, in just that safe, non-judgmental environment, it just sit back, be still, like you said. Sometimes, and I feel, you made a good point, where people are uncomfortable.
Yeah.
They can't stop talking. It's like you have to fill the void, but sometimes you have to sit in that silence.
Absolutely. Yeah. Silence is not necessarily a bad thing.
Right. Well, because I think it's also, when you hear something, it's almost like it forces you to look inside yourself. And I feel like that's scary for a lot of people. When you hear something uncomfortable, you want to push it away, but it almost opens up some part of yourself that you may not want to examine.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, difficult conversations are called that because that's what they are. They are difficult, but you can get through them. And I think, again, if we are uncomfortable on a subject, then we should probably be exploring it.
I agree. I absolutely agree. And that's why, and you mentioned your podcast. So for folks who want to listen and tune in, what is it called? What is it about? How can they listen?
Right. Thank you. It's the Sifu Mimi Chan show. So it's pretty easy. Just type in my name. All my socials the same, and I talk about it. But basically, it was born out of a desire to share the stories of others and to build empathy. Our country has become so divisive. And I think if we realize that we have a lot more in common, and that we can respect one another, where we come from, what we do. I have just the gamut of guests on the show, from authors and writers to actors to fitness professionals. But really, at the heart of it, we're all just people, and just having our own story to share. And I feel like sharing stories and learning about others really, really encourages empathy. And I think that is something that is sorely lacking today. And again, with the listening, right? And so I've been privileged to be able to learn through every single conversation I have on my show. And it is a continuous journey of learning. And I'm so grateful to have that outlet and to have that voice, but also to be able to give voice to others who, haven't maybe had the chance to share their story. So
and everyone has a story, right? Everyone has a story. And, I'm so glad that you're able to use your voice and your platform to let others share their stories and their experiences. And hopefully, yes, my gosh, if we just stop and listen, how much can we learn? And I loved your point where at the end of the day, we truly are the same, right? We have all the same, desire. We all want to be respected and heard and loved and feel that connection. And we're all, flesh and bone. And that's it seems so simple, right, but it's so profound. And I think a lot of people gloss over it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I feel like there's just more of a commonality than the differences. And if we really stop to think about it, and I know, like, our fellow humans really all want the same things, and we can kind of hone in and focus on that, then we can probably work out the differences with much more success. But it will take time and listening. So
yeah, progress takes time. It takes commitment.
Absolutely. Anything worth doing is usually difficult and hard to do, and you have to go through it. And so, all the things that we've been talking about today, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, hey, I mean, you did not become a martial arts expert with no effort.
Yes, Kung Fu literally kind of interprets into the words hard work. Like it's the symbolic meaning of it is hard work. And it is something that is not to just be thought of as a martial term and what you do in the physical aspect, but it is to be applied to everything you do, right? And so when you say you practice Kung Fu, it's not just, oh, I'm going to do kicks and punches and I'm going to, work out. Really, it's like you should be working hard at everything you do in life, and like that is the same thing. Like when you learn Kung Fu, all the principles that you learn there, the respect and the fellowship and the kindness, that should be carried over into your everyday life. Like that's the goal.
So I know you still teach. Do you also continue to practice? Like, do you?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. As a teacher, you are first a student and always a student. So you are always a student. Otherwise, then you have nothing left to learn. And that's kind of, as an educator, like it's a lifelong journey of learning. And so, yeah, you have to keep practicing in order to teach. One, to just stay in shape, but also just the complexity of everything. It's very, very involved. So, yeah, I have my own practice time. As a teacher, many teachers of any art form, of any education knows, like you end up giving so much that you do have to kind of carve out time for yourself and prioritize that in order to get it done. But it's a balancing act. I juggle a lot of different things, and hence mental health awareness is so important.
So important. Well, Mimi, thank you so much for sharing your story. And, I really feel like it's going to help empower others. And, if we can make, like you said, one person feel less alone, I mean, that's huge.
Yeah, absolutely. And, we're all here to learn and listen. Like you said, thank you for having this conversation with me and bringing out awareness. It's such an important thing. And you don't always get to see these type of stories on the news or this type of information. So kudos to you. And thank you for doing your part in elevating us.
Oh my gosh, my pleasure.